प्रसार भारती अभिलेखागार की प्रस्तुति सदाबहार सुनहरे दौर का अनमोल खजाना।
Hello. While it was time for fun, frolic and celebration in Hollywood, soon after the Allied victory in the First World War, far away in Eastern Europe, a new national concept was being worked out. The architects of this fantastic national plan were none other than fiery intellectuals like Lenin and Anatol Lunacharsky. Sensing the imperative need to make the people of the world's largest republic understand the philosophy and practice of socialism, Lenin placed this heavy responsibility on the shoulders of young filmmakers and called cinema the most important of all arts. Right from the beginning, it was decided that cinema would be treated like any other art form and not as a mere vehicle for commercial propaganda. So with this assurance, young Soviet filmmakers plunged into the art of developing a new language to express a new philosophy. From the inception, filmmakers were plagued with a severe shortage of raw stocks and equipment, all of which had to be imported from Europe. To ensure economy in filming practice, it was necessary to develop institutions to train young directors and technicians. And this responsibility was put on the shoulders of Lev Kuleshov, a person who was also responsible for introducing some revolutionary concepts in film editing. Innovations began here in the field of newsreels, and we have the outstanding example of Dziga Vertov, who did not want to make cinema as a series of illustrative tableaux. Not only did he want to make people see things, but he also wanted them to realize the significance of the event in a cinematic manner. In his monumental work called The Man with the Movie Camera, he presents the city of Moscow in the way a modern city should be portrayed. He called this experiment Kino Pravda, or the cinematic truth. For Vertov, truth meant not just the truthful portrayal of the subject, but also the process by which the subject is portrayed on the screen. The film had to orient the viewer to the technology of the cinema and make him comfortable in the presence of the screen. So Vertov compares the cranking of the camera handle to the turning of the steam engine's wheels. Later, he captures the notion of motion. The motion of the film in the camera handle, the steam engine, the car in which the cameraman moves, and the vehicle in which the passengers are traveling. He cuts back and forth between subjective and objective shots and demystifies any sort of awe that might exist in the audience's mind. It was a tradition of Kuleshov and Dziga Vertov that other young Soviet filmmakers decided to follow. And top on the list was a young engineer called Sergei Mikhailovich Eisenstein. His first film called Strike was essentially an attempt at breaking the theatrical roots of cinema by actually filming a play in the open with no prosceniums. But then after watching the finished product, Eisenstein realized that there was really no point in waging a war against theatre. What was really necessary to give cinema a new idiom, a new synthesis of time and space, of form and content. So in 1925, Eisenstein made a film which is still today on any film critic's list of 10 best films. The film was called Battleship Potemkin, and it portrays the saga of a shipload of sailors who protest and stage a mutiny against their authorities in protest against the poor quality of food served on board. For Eisenstein, every shot was an idea cell which came into conflict with its following shot. For him, cinema was a plastic art, and a story was born only when several shots got juxtaposed with each other to create a new meaning. The concept of the new meaning can be seen when Eisenstein demonstrates the idea of anger rising in the sailor who is washing the already clean plates. He fragments the breaking action into 10 different shots, almost simulating the broken plate.
If you read that famous essay by Eisenstein, Griffith, Dickens and Film Today. Dickens, Griffith and Film Today. You know, this is the extension. What Eisenstein did was the extension of the narrative form, which was there in Dickens as a novelist, and also in Griffith as an exponent of narrative form. And well, this is the extension, that's all. And I don't feel the difference between the two. One doesn't negate the other. On the other hand, one complements the other.
In this much celebrated Odessa step sequence, Eisenstein demonstrates a brilliant play of graphic conflicts, oppositions in motion, volume, lighting, textures, characters, classes, etc., etc. Right out of a big crowd, he would isolate a little boy, and then his mother, and then again some supporters who reverse the trend of running down and begin walking up. Battleship Potemkin was hailed as the most powerful film of that period and recognized even in the artistic circles of Europe. What differentiated Potemkin from the other contemporary films was its clever usage of editing principles which are known today as the theory of montage. His films had to be seen to be understood, in the way that one has to see physically the paintings of Da Vinci or the architecture of Taj Mahal to really understand what they signify. After Potemkin, Eisenstein went on to make October in 1928 and The General Line in 1929. But the Soviet authorities were so vociferously against the formalism of Eisenstein's works that Eisenstein was completely frustrated and had no options but to leave for Europe and America to seek greener pastures. His contemporary, however, found a kind of middle path with the administration's view about the cinema. His name was Pudovkin, and his films would resemble a song if Eisenstein's films could be called a scream. Pudovkin's first film was called The Mother, based on the very famous book by Gorky. Pudovkin captures the sentimental drama of the mother, who's torn between her alcoholic husband, who's part of a secret counter-revolutionary group, and her idealistic son, who wants to lead the workers to a glorious future. Unfortunately, father and son clash in a major reprisal and the father is killed. Pudovkin laid an enormous stress on performance, good emotional acting. At the same time, he believed in the power of editing, close-ups versus long shots, and symbolic details like the officer's white gloves. During the interrogation, the naive mother admits that her son was part of the gang that killed her husband, and even reveals some evidence to it. Conclusion: when mother and son meet coincidentally each other on May Day, a regiment of Cossacks attack the demonstration, and sadly, both mother and son die in each other's arms. Pudovkin went on to make a couple of more films, but then even he was attacked by the authorities for his formalism. Surprisingly, the most interesting filmmaker to come from the plains of the Soviet Union was a Ukrainian-born Alexander Dovzhenko. Coming from a Ukrainian peasant background, Dovzhenko made his first film called Zvenigora for Odessa Studios. The studio directors, however, could not understand the intentions of this film at all. So they called in Eisenstein and Pudovkin from Moscow to assess the work. The two doyens of cinema saw this great masterpiece and called it a profound national poetic invention. Dovzhenko was highly relieved, and his imagery reached its peak with the much acclaimed film called Earth. Dedicated to the theme of collectivization of agricultural farms, Dovzhenko sees the whole farming activity in a holistic manner. He sees the exuberant son on the tractor with the same concern as his father still working on an old hoe. His rapid editing seems to be styled along the typical lines of Eisenstein and Pudovkin. But there is an enormous difference, for he observes minor details like the way women turn the sheaf of wheat around, a horse that approves, and the smiles on the people's faces. Earth remains one of the finest works that use sheer compositional techniques and textures extensively to communicate the poetry of the farm and the landscape. His usage of sound, actions and gestures establish a new rhythm in cinema. Honestly, this aspect of film designing is something which suffered heavily after the introduction of sound. Like his celebrated Russian colleagues, Dovzhenko also came under severe fire from the authorities for what they thought was his defeatist attitude. Those fascinating yet real images of the rural people were considered to be counter-revolutionary. Very soon, Dovzhenko succumbed to the pressures of officialdom, and he was to make propaganda films in his later years. But one filmmaker who managed to stay clear of any sort of bureaucratic intervention was Abraham Room. In his most celebrated film, Bed and Sofa, he focuses on a married woman who is caught between a boorish, unsophisticated husband and his very polished, urbanized friend. This film could certainly be called one of the first feminist films to be made, for it takes the viewer through her dilemma in the most realistic manner. To enhance the realism of the claustrophobic house, he had Sergei Yutkevich, one of the finest set designers in the Soviet Union at that time. Watching his mise en scène, it is very obvious that Abraham Room is in complete control of his actions, his artists, and all their details. This obviously was a discipline which several Soviet filmmakers inherited from their strong theatrical backgrounds. This brilliant scene in the aircraft portrays the sudden sense of freedom that the poor wife manages to get in her dull, monotonous life. When they come back home, she slowly senses a feeling of sexual affection for her new friend. But a sense of guilt seemed to be pervading the tiny apartment at the same time. It is indeed a great tragedy that the Soviet cinema, which celebrated the climax of the aesthetics of the silent film, was completely silenced by insensitive authorities. Unlike Lenin, who said that cinema was going to be the greatest of all arts, the new ruler said that it was going to be the greatest medium for propaganda. And the task, they said, was to take it into our hands. And this is what they did exactly. So, till we meet next time, goodbye.